Hi, Paul here, and I'm here with Ashlee. Say hi, Ashlee.
Hello.
Now, we are here walking Ashlee's cat, Freddie, which you might think is a little bit unusual, but even more unusual is we're using the example of walking the cat to describe the flow of the week for this week. What this flow basically does is allow you to take a document that's in Word or PowerPoint or Excel and actually turn it into a PDF on the fly so that you can load it into PowerApps onto the phone. The reason you might use this, or the reason this has come up for us, is Ashlee and I have built an inspection app which is used for field workers to inspect facilities. So for example, it could be this playground over here, the barbecue facilities over to the left there, Ashlee. All of these things, it's very common in certain scenarios for field workers to come out and perform quality inspections on these pieces of equipment. Sometimes though, if you need to actually perform that inspection, often you might need to quickly call up calibration information, service history and information like that so you can make an informed decision. So we are going to, apart from let Freddie go for a walk, we're going to go back now, if he lets us, and show you how to build an app that displays Word documents as a PDF in PowerApps using Flow to do the magic. Well, hey everyone, we are back from our walk, having sufficiently walked the cat. He's happy.
He's good.
I think he's good. And so now let's have a look at bringing to life this use case where we are going to use Flow to display Word, Excel and PowerPoint documents inside PowerApps. Now, first up, we better show you the SharePoint side of things because we have actually prepared a SharePoint document library. And what goodness have we put in here, Ashlee?
Well, we've got a whole bunch of Excel files, some Word documents, a PowerPoint, and a nice folder.
Yes, we have, and the folder is there just because we know that even though people like to do metadata and tag things properly, a lot of people still kind of have a folder-centric mindset despite our best efforts. So we made sure that this flow works whether documents are in folders or not. So that's why that's there, just to show that. Yeah. There's also some columns there too, Ashlee. What have we got there?
So we made two columns. One is called equipment, and we've just put in barbecue and swings as two examples of equipment. And we've got another column called document type. So we've got parts, manual, warranty, those sort of things.
Exactly. And the key thing is these are actually free text columns too. So if you wish to add another different piece of equipment, like, I don't know, what else could we put in?
Lawn.
Lawn, exactly. Lawn. So if you needed a manual for lawn, maybe you do need a manual for lawn.
Maybe it needs to be a certain height. I don't know.
Yeah, lawn height specs. You could put in lawn and then say specifications as a document type, and the app we're going to build will accommodate that. So that's the SharePoint bit. Let's now go to the Power App bit. So here we are in our handy dandy world of Power Apps. What we're going to do first is build about 90% of this Power App really quick. We're not here to explain Power Apps. This is a flow day today, but you can at least, if you haven't done Power Apps before, this is probably not a bad example of what it can do. And then we will spend some time and detail on Flow, and then we'll just return to the Power App to do the final wiring up of everything. So to make it easier and better on screen real estate, I'm going to pick a tablet layout Power App. And here we go. And the very first thing we need to do is connect to that SharePoint document library that we were just looking at, this guy here, in Power Apps. And we do that via how?
Well, we go into the View tab and we select data sources.
We do indeed. And then we would go and add a data source. And I have way too many data sources for way too many demos and proof of concepts. But for you guys, if you don't have a SharePoint data source, you will click on New Connection and add SharePoint. I already have a SharePoint connection. In fact, I've been naughty and I have more than one. Ashlee's giving me the shake. Yes, the disappointing shake. So I will click on an existing one, and then the site that we're using here is called Flow of the Week, and I'm going to click on that. Now at this point, it would list all of the SharePoint lists in this particular site, except we're using a document library because that's where the documents live. So that means we have to actually manually type in the name of the document library to connect it. So Power Apps can happily connect to document libraries. It's just you've got to type the name in. You want to go ahead and throw that one in? Cool. Mark that. Click connect. And if all things go to plan, it comes up and says, hey, you have a connection. Next thing we'll do
is now we're going to view those documents, and we'll do that via adding a gallery to the screen. And I'm just going to go a blank gallery rather than a built-in one with built-in bits and pieces. So I'm going to choose blank vertical, and we'll push it down a little bit because we'll put some drop downs up here. And the very first thing we do with the gallery is change its data source to that document library that we just added. So we click that, and like drum roll excitement, absolutely nothing happens because we actually don't have any controls in this gallery to display any of the data from the library. So let's throw in a label, shall we? So we'll click on pencil, go to label, and instantly, and in fact, I'm going to shrink up this gallery just by reducing the template.
Make that label a bit bigger.
Yeah, make the label a bit bigger. Then I'll bring it over here. So there. Now, at the moment, it's coming up with a couple of names, but they don't actually match any of the file names that we've put here. That's because by default, I guess the PowerApps is trying to be clever, and it uses the title field in SharePoint as the default thing to display. Now, luckily, the way galleries work is because this gallery knows about this data source, we can pretty much grab any column we want and display it in here, including the file name. So if I go back to my gallery and I go back to my pencil and I click on this label here that we added, right now it says this item.title. This item refers to whichever row the gallery is displaying from the data source. But if I get rid of title, we have one called file name with extension. And so if I put that one up, straight away we are seeing all of the files in the library, including a folder. So the way the gallery works, it doesn't really distinguish between folders and files. They're just all things inside a SharePoint library, and it displays it straight away. While we're here, I want to show you another thing too. As well as file name with extension, there is another built-in property, which is quite handy, called path. And so path actually then shows you can see that, oh, look, that's how you can tell something's in a folder or not. So just bear that in mind. We're going to use path later on. So if we go and put it back to file name with extension, we see all our file names. So that's cool. We are seeing a bunch of documents. What we need to do now, though, is we want to filter these documents, ideally based on the piece of equipment first, and then the document type.
Yeah.
What's the best way to do that?
Well, let's add a drop down.
Cool. I will do that. So if I go to the Insert menu, go to Controls, I'll choose Drop Down. Okay, Ash, I have put in a drop down, and I'm seeing these values 1, 2, and 3. What's going on with that?
So PowerApps has this sample data that it puts in for you. And for a drop down, it's just the numbers 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. And if we wanted to put our own data in, technically I could just put in barbecue and something like that.
You could even put in Ashlee.
Cool. And you can see straight away there's the effect, right? But there's a much nicer way. We already have a column which has a list of the pieces of equipment we want.
Yeah, and if we did it this way, if we did add another type of equipment, it's not going to show up in the app.
Exactly. So let's not do the hard-coded way. How can we get all of the pieces of equipment into a drop-down?
Well, if you connect that drop-down to the SharePoint document library,
yep,
and then do what's called a distinct of that column, it'll give you back all the distinct values in that column.
Let's give it a go. Show us how it's done.
So if we start typing in distinct and then use the documents library that we were looking at.
So the first parameter in distinct is the data source. What do you want to get unique values out of?
Yeah.
Right? What's the second parameter all about?
So the expression, which is essentially saying what part do you want to be distinct?
Yes.
So for this, it's the column.
Yep.
And the column we're using, if we go down and find it, you can go through all of them, but we're just going to be using the equipment column.
Yep. Close that off.
So if you close that off.
And let's have a look-see. Interesting. So we now have swings, barbecue, but we have a blank one. What's going on there?
So if we go back into that SharePoint document library, you can see that if you do go through the equipment column, you have swings, barbecue, and then you also have a blank value. And that counts as a distinct value because it's another value, even if it's empty.
Yep. So what we're going to do is we want to remove this blank value. We definitely want to filter blank ones out, but to show you how to do that, it's actually worth a quick interlude to explain what this distinct function is doing. Here is a little PowerPoint slide that explains exactly what's going on with distinct. On the left, you can see a table with 5 columns, column A, B, C, D, and E, and they all have different values. The distinct function is doing a distinct on column D, so it's this one that we're interested in. So the distinct will be A, B, and C as far as values. But here is the key thing to understand. A distinct does not filter this. A distinct actually creates a whole new column, right, separate from this table, and it's a single value column, like a single row, sorry, a single column.
It's a table.
It's a table, yes, a single column table with a heading or a column name of result. And that's the bit that's important. I want you to just bear in mind that column name of result. So now back in our PowerApps, here's what we need to do to get rid of that blank one. If I we're going to filter the results of the distinct function, which means it's that single column table of result. So if I go filter, we'll filter, how about a bracket, filter the output of the distinct function. And what are we going to filter? Well, we're going to basically make sure, we're going to say not is blank, is blank. And we're basically going to look at the column called result. So what we're saying is please filter that distinct output and only bring me back the non-blank ones. And so that now has the effect where straight away we're only seeing swings and barbecue. And as Ashlee said earlier, the benefit of this approach is if you added new equipment type to your document library over time, this dropdown is going to self-build and take care of itself.
And also, if you had 30 different types of equipment, you don't have to type them all into PowerApps.
Yeah, exactly right. Definitely. Okay, so here's the other little added bonus of what we're going to do today. We're also going to show you how to do cascading dropdowns, because what we'll do underneath here is we're going to put another dropdown in. And what this dropdown is going to do is, based on the equipment that you choose, it then shows you which pieces of equipment, which documents are available. So going back to SharePoint, here's what this means. At the moment, we only have 2 documents associated with barbecues. We have parts and manual. And so if you choose barbecue from the equipment list, you'll only see parts and manual in the dropdown. But if you choose swings instead, you'll see parts, warranty, and manual from the dropdown. So that's the idea of this one. So let's do that this way. So we'll throw in another control dropdown. We're still going to use distinct, but we have to do it a little bit differently this time. So first up, we're actually going to start by come back to the items property. And we're going to do this. I'm actually going to go filter, and I'm going to basically filter the documents library. All right, there's our data source. But this time I want to filter it with whatever is typed into this drop-down here, which is currently called drop-down 1. Remember the name of that drop-down. So if I go, I'm going to filter where the equipment column is equal to drop-down 1 dot. And drop-downs have a property called selected. And then from selected, we have value. And that straight away is going to automatically filter the documents by the equipment type. So because they're swings, there'll be 4. But here's the thing. If I do this right now, you'll see the space for the 4, but you're not seeing any values. Why is that? Well, at the moment, we've only filtered the table. We've basically reduced the table from, say, this to this, but we haven't then done the distinct to give us the particular piece of the particular document type.
We haven't told it what we want it to display.
Exactly.
We've just said display the item, but we haven't told it which column to look at.
Exactly. So I'm going to wrap around this a distinct function. So if I go distinct, and so we're going to do a distinct on the output of that filter, but this time we're going to do a distinct on the document type column. And there it is there. And if I close this one, now suddenly you'll see the effect. Swings has manual, warranty, and parts. And then if we do barbecue, barbecue has only manual and parts. So isn't that neat? We've now done cascading drop-downs. So if you're not a PowerApps person, you've learned something new, added bonus, because we're all about value for money, aren't we, Ashlee?
Yeah.
For free videos.
Yeah.
All right. So the next stage is this. Now that we've got this working, we need to filter all of this content based on these 2. Right? So the gallery needs to be filtered based on what's in here. So if we come back to this gallery, when we first did it and we wired it up, the items property is set to the documents library, documents. But now what we need to do is actually filter. So if we do this, filter, we'll filter the documents based on. So first up, let's filter on equipment, right? So if we went equipment, the equipment column in the library is equal to drop down one.selected.value. Use the little IntelliSense under here because these things are case sensitive and the IntelliSense handles that for you. Now, if I do that, that's not the full thing yet, but this will at least show that this will come down and now we're seeing only the barbecue documents. The nice thing about filter is it allows you to do additional filter parameters. So if I add a comma here, you're going to say something?
Well, if you look at the top here, it shows you there's the three little
dots that suggest there's more parameters.
Yeah, so if you do put a comma there, it'll show you can add another logical tag.
Exactly. And so this is where we'll go document type. Document type, there it is there. Document type equals drop down to dot selected dot value. And if we do that, and if we wait a second, we're now seeing stuff. So check it out. If I go, let's just have a look at the parts for that one. Cool. What about swings? Swings has one manual. What about parts? It has two parts. Remember, we had that folder. And inside this folder, guess what? We have another parts document. So happy places. We're almost built our app. So the last thing we'll do is, I'm going to just shift this over here. Second last thing we'll do. Let's insert a control called a PDF viewer.
That's a fun one.
It is. PDF viewer is a good control. You can do lots of cool things with it. But we'll pick it up and we're going to put it over here. And like everything else, it has sample content. So it's got a property called document with a property called sample PDF with some of that lorem ipsum kind of content.
Simply square PDF.
It is. And the final thing we need to do is in our gallery, I'm going to add a button to the side, like a go button. And when you click the go button, that's going to then load the PDF, or Flow's going to do the magic for us. So if I go insert button, and let's just move it over here. You know you've done it right because you will see one button in every row of the gallery. It's a common mistake for people, particularly when we run hackathons, that people will insert a button, but it'll actually be inserted at the screen level, which means it's not inside the gallery.
I mean, I've done it plenty of times.
Yeah, me too. You and me both. And you only realize later on complex screens when you go to scroll and it stays exactly where it is. Okay, now this is about as far as we can get. With this, we now have to actually switch to Flow because the next stage is this. When we click go, we are going to pass that document's information to Flow. Flow is then going to say, hey, SharePoint, can you please give me a PDF URL for this document? And SharePoint's going to say, sure, here you go. And then we're going to pass that PDF URL to this PDF viewer web part. We are in Flow now, and we are going to make a blank flow. And so we need to come down from the connectors here. And we are going to choose a PowerApps trigger. So this flow is going to be run when you do something in PowerApps. So if I type in the word power here, you can see there's PowerApps there. I'm going to click that one here and click PowerApps as the trigger. There is nothing else you need to do here when it comes to PowerApps, but there are a few traps for younger players that you need to be aware of when you work with this connector. Now, there are two things that we're going to send from the PowerApp to Flow. Number one is we need the list item ID of the document we're interested in. So coming back to here, we're in our document. Every one of these documents, you SharePoint people would know this, they each have a unique ID. And we need to pass the ID of the one we want to have PDF viewed in. We also need to send the path of the file to the Flow as well. And that handles the folder scenario. Okay, so what we're going to do first is take care of that and give a couple of bits of advice for how to do this. The step we're going to use initially is the initialize variable step. Yeah, he has a thing about variables, but he's not here to argue, so we're just going to do it. So initialize variable step, and we're going to make a variable. We'll make it a string, so type string, and I'm just going to call it ID, like the item ID. That's the common one. And this is the thing. Now, with this, the way PowerApps works, or this PowerApps trigger works, is for this value here, I can come across into the dynamic content panel here, and if I click see more, it has this ask in PowerApps. But here's the thing, don't do it yet, right? Don't do it yet. Before you do it, come up here and rename your action, okay, to a meaningful name. Now, I am going to call this item ID, the list item ID.
File ID.
Oh, file ID. Okay, fair enough. We'll call it file ID.
Makes a bit more sense since it's not really a list item, it's a
Good point.
file.
Good point. Okay, now, why am I doing this, you might ask? Well, if you come and do this ask in PowerApps, okay, it names this parameter based on the name of the action, not the name of the variable. And so if you don't change that, you'll get this big ugly thing that says
initialize variable value.
Yeah, initialize variable value.
And then you'll do another variable and it will just say initialize variable to value.
Exactly. Now the problem with this is, you'll see it later on, when we call this in PowerApps, it basically runs formulas. In fact, we will show you that. So basically, if you don't rename these, it's difficult for the poor PowerApps user to put meaningful parameters in. It's not obvious what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first one. So now let's add another variable step. Insert variable. I normally just search for the word variable. Initialize, yes, that's the one that we want. So this one we're going to call file path, or just path.
Folder path.
Folder path. So I'll call it folder path like that. We'll make it a string. And once again, let's rename it like that. And here we go. So once again now, what's the value of this one? We're also going to ask PowerApps for that, asking PowerApps. Now I'm going to save at this point for a very good reason. Let me just do a quick save. Now the reason I saved is I also want to call out something. If you are unfortunate enough to come in and then go, actually, I'm going to ask in PowerApps again, and then you go, oh, whoops, no, I did too many, I don't want that one, and you delete it, do you notice it's still there? So we now have this folder path value _1. Now, the problem with that is when you call this flow from PowerApps, it's going to ask you for that third parameter, even though you're not using it.
Even if you're not using it, it'll just ask you for whatever is listed in dynamic content.
So basically, here's the thing. If you do, be careful when you do this to get it right. If you don't have it right and you want to fix it, you can actually use John Liu's great tool called Flow Studio to fix it. But out of the box, you kind of have to either start again or you have to be really careful. You've got to mess with things. So that's why I'm now going to quickly close and open this and reload. And back in we go. So we are back in happy places. And just to be sure, there's just the two in one. Now, we have another issue here. Basically, the path that comes from PowerApps isn't quite in the format we want. Okay, when we send this to SharePoint to say, hey, generate the PDF URL, there's a slight difference in what SharePoint wants versus what PowerApps wants, or PowerApps sends, which we'll put up on the screen. Okay, so now that we've established that, we need to actually modify this. We're going to actually use an expression in Flow. If you're new to Flow expressions, this isn't a bad place to start. We are going to use an expression in Flow to modify this to remove that extra slash on the end that we were just talking about. Okay, so on the screen you can see what we're going to do. We're going to use an expression called substring, which takes an existing string and can take chunks of it out. And it takes two parameters. The first one is where to start, the position of the string to start, and the second one is where to end. And so because all we have to do is get rid of the trailing slash, we can actually use another function that gets the total length of the string, and we just subtract 1. So if the string was like 10 characters and we wanted 0 to 9, we just go length of the string minus 1, and that's the second parameter. So that's the basic function. We're going to use substring, and we're going to use sub, and we're going to use length. One subtracts, one gets the length, one gets the substring. Okay, now let's turn our attention to Flow to actually make that happen. First up, and here are some neat tricks. Number one, I'm going to delete this folder path value because, well, as we explained before, it still exists. We'll be able to refer to it. So what we do is we come over to the Dynamic Content tab, and instead we click Expression. And there's some little tricks here that I'm going to show that some people don't know. So first we need to do substring, SUB, ST, and you can see that already it's found our function. And if I click on this and then put a bracket, it actually has put a closed bracket and it's put some help text in an annoying spot that actually doesn't show it.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, so, but if you click in the middle there, I've clicked on it, here's the trick that a lot of people don't realize. While your cursor is there, if I go back to dynamic content now, I can go and grab my variable that I did earlier, and like magic, it filled it all in.
Yay!
That is useful, although not obvious. So the next thing is a substring takes a number of parameters. The first parameter was the string, so we have that. So now we put a comma. And again, now we get a little helpful box in totally the wrong spot. It's actually, I'm going to type in a 0 and see what happens. 0, cool. So the first is position 0, right? Now we need to subtract the length by 1, right?
Find the end position.
Exactly. So I'm going to go subtract, right? And what are we subtracting? Well, we're subtracting the length. So you can do functions in functions, just like Excel, right? And now open bracket on length. And so what is the length we're getting? It's that variable, folder path value. So once again, if we're lucky, I click it and it's done it. There's our folder path value. Looks a bit ugly. Now this is where my brackets are going to be fun. I think I'm in the right spot. So then we need to subtract it by 1. And all things going to plan, that should be enough. I think I will click OK and cross my fingers. Oh my goodness, I've got it first go. At this point, I say, because I'm like, oh my goodness, it worked,
You've done so well.
And we can even test this right now. Let's just see what happens, because check this out. If I click test up here, I will perform the trigger action. So we don't actually have to run it from PowerApps. And it literally comes up and says, what do you want for the field ID? So let's pretend it was file ID. File ID number 1. And the folder path can be something like /shared documents /boo. Just remember, you always get a closing slash that comes from PowerApps. And so if I run this now, it says it's run, it says it's successful. We're getting happy green lights. If we look at folder path now, and look at that, we have lopped off the annoying trailing slash. All right, so now that we've proved that we've got the folder path in the way we want, let's go back into the flow. And now here's the key step. This is where we're going to say, we're going to call SharePoint. We're going to call a particular URL, or we're going to call a SharePoint API. And we're going to basically pass the file ID and the folder path to it. And we're basically going to say in a roundabout way, can you please give us a URL with a PDF version of this particular document? So that's what the plan is. Now, the little bit of theory for this is the API is actually called render list data as stream, which is the very long word. And it does a whole bunch of other things. It does way beyond just doing PDF URLs. I think we've used it for generating thumbnails of photos in our inspection apps. It can do document summary stuff. It brings back all sorts of interesting information about files and content inside SharePoint document library.
There are a lot of fun things to play with.
Yeah, basically that in a nutshell. And you'll see that in a second for the sheer amount of data that comes back. So what the actual URL looks like is you will call the SharePoint site, and you can see there's one culmsee.sharepoint.com/sites/flow of the week. And this is how you call the API from here. We go _API web lists. Then we specify the document library that we want to get it from, which is documents. Then we're calling render list data as stream. And then you can see a question mark, and then it says filter field 1 equals ID and filter field value 1 equals 14. So for example, what that does is that goes to SharePoint and gets the ID with the value of 14, the 14th document in the library, and it goes and gets a whole bunch of stuff back. Now, that's how you call the URL. But when you actually call this URL, you got to also send some other stuff with it. And that's basically in the body of the request, we send 2 things. Number 1, we actually send the folder of where the document is. And the other one, there's this funky thing called render options with this number 4103. And so what is this render options? To answer the question, I've come to Microsoft's documentation, and it actually has, the site is called quickly working with lists and list items in REST. And if we scroll back down, if I get it right, you can see here it is, there is one called retrieve items as stream, and it says retrieves information about the list and its data. And if I scroll down past all of these parameters, lots and lots of stuff and doco and stuff and doco, and we get to request body. And so when we call this, the one we were just talking about was this one called render options. And there it is there. Render options specifies the type of output to return. And then it says, see the next section for possible values. So if we come down here, here's the table. So the way it works is if you go, I'd like to see some context info, that's number one. And I'd like to see the list data, and that's number two. So 1 plus 2 is 3. So if you sent a render options of 3, you're going to get context info and list data back. Now, if we actually scroll down, we're not even going to go half through these things. I don't even know what half of these do. But if you go down to this one, enable media TA URLs, I think the TA probably stands for translation or something, because check this out, enables URLs pointing to the media TA service, such as thumbnail URL, video manifest URL, PDF conversion URL.
I wonder which one we're going to use.
I wonder. So the number 4103 is basically 4096 plus a couple of these other ones, maybe, I don't know, list schema and list data, but it adds up to 4103. So there's your little bit of theory. Let's actually build the flow. So I'm going to add a step, and the step we're going to use is a SharePoint action, so we can go straight to the shortcuts here and click SharePoint. And one of the actions here is called send a HTTP request to SharePoint, and that's what we're going to do. And so the site address, well, that's easy because we've already connected. So we're going to connect to Flow of the Week. We are going to do a post. We have to do a post to this API. And in the URL, you can even see the sample is kind of like what we want to do. So I will paste in here, API lists, get by title, and then we use a single quote and go documents, like that. And then we go / render list data as stream. Cool, except we don't want 14 in the value there. We want the ID that PowerApps passed it. So if we click on here, that's the API that we need to call. The next bit, though, is we're not done. We need to then do the body as well. We're pasting the body, which is in JSON format. There's that render options that we just explained. And then the folder server relative URL is we need to do this. We need to go sites/flow of the week / and that's where we put the folder path in. So if we do it like this, in theory, we've got it right. We actually can do it. And we can test this in a second. We need to anyway. So let's, we can rename this, and let's just call this, get PDF URL from SharePoint, among other things.
Yeah.
Among other stuff.
I have so good at typing.
Oh, you always go on about my typing. Let's test it and even see if we got this right, because we may not have it right. So I'm going to perform the test again. So once again, I'm just going to go field ID is number 1, and the folder path will be / shared documents, because I know the first one wasn't in a folder. If I run that, and if I did that right, we'll look for green dots of happiness, which we have. So if we open this one up, let's take a closer look inside. So have a look at the outputs here in the body. Now I'm going to cut and paste this in a second to make it easier, but just to show you how much stuff comes back from this API, there's lots of stuff, lots of good stuff. So how about I grab all this? This is what came back from that API call. And we need to call attention to a couple of areas. Firstly, in amongst all of this stuff,
there is so much.
There is a lot. Like, check this out. There's a lot of good stuff. I'm sure developers just think this is awesome. But in this section called list data, line 4, there's a section called list data. And list data has an object in it called row. And then the row is for each and every file that comes back. we have a set of stuff like ID, permissions, unique ID, prog ID, and all of this stuff. But here's the important point. There is one row for every matching file that we've asked the API to do. Now, we are only sending one document to it. We specify the ID. There's only ever going to be one coming back, but it still comes back as an array. It comes back structured for multiple because it's also possible to call this API and actually return the PDF URL for multiple documents. And so therefore, it's always going to return multiple rows, even though we have one in here. So if I just scroll down a little bit and indents them so you can see, that's the end of that row. Okay, and then we come down to more interesting info. There's list schema, which was one of those render options. And if I scroll down a little bit further, we get to the other interesting bit, which is about here, PDF conversion URL. Now, this is the bit where Ashlee took a while to figure this one out. I handballed this one to her, so she sat there for half a day and was very happy when she got it working. But this is the URL. This is what we need, okay? That's the PDF URL. But here's the thing. It's not fully formed for us. We need to do some of the work. And this stuff in square brackets, these are tokens, squiggly brackets, I should say, braces. They are tokens. So we literally have to do this. We get this PDF URL back, and then we have to go, oh, media base URL, where's that? And you look up here, there's the media base URL, and you can go, cool, how about we go and grab that bit, and we put it there. Okay, and then you go across, and the next thing you go .file type, and so on and so forth. So we literally have to go and build the URL ourselves. Okay, so now that we've got the URL back, we need to add another step to Flow to basically construct the exact PDF URL to send back to PowerApps. So we've confirmed that everything's working, which is great. I should also mention, by the way, that if you mess this up and if you do not, if like you went and got an ID that doesn't exist, if you didn't match anything, this row thing would be empty. Now, if this row is empty and there's no data in it, the next step will fail. Okay, so it's really important that you actually got real data back here. And here's why. I'm going to actually copy this to the clipboard, everything in here. And now we are going to do this. We are going to add another step in Flow. It's called a parse JSON step. There it is, data operations. All this stuff that comes back, if we parse it in JSON, it becomes, all of the output is in these nice little, what would you call them, flow parameters that we can use in subsequent steps.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to describe it?
Dynamic content.
Dynamic content. Okay, yeah, that's a good, yeah, of course, for the panel.
Yeah.
So here's what we do. We're going to take the output, all the data returned by this step here. So I'm going to come to parse JSON, go to content, and we go down and we're going to get the body from get PDF URL, among other stuff, and we put it there. Then it says, what's the schema? Like, how do I know if this content is a number versus a string versus a date? And that's what the schema is for. So if I click use sample payload to generate schema and we paste our payload into there and we click done, that is actually now enough Flow to be able to make use of all of those little individual bits in that output. So now we're going to create another initialized variable step. And this is where we are going to use the output of parse JSON, which has broken it up into nice little neat bits for us. And this is the actual URL. So we're going to call this PDF URL. Here's
URL.
PDF.
PRD.
PDF URL. It's going to be a string. Okay. And now here's where things get interesting. The token was the base URL. So if we actually go, that's the first thing we need, .media base URL. But now, thanks to our handy dandy parse JSON action, check this out. If I click on value, and if we come across to dynamic content, under parse JSON, here is all of our stuff.
Well, if you click more, there will be all of your stuff.
Click more. That's right, because I think by default it only shows the string ones, and if it's so this shows everything. But if we go down, we should see there it is, .media base URL. So let's put that there first. Okay, so I'm going to grab everything between those two tokens because we just do that like as is. Control C.
That's just a font string.
Yep, exactly. So if I paste that there. We've now done that. By the way, new players to Flow. Notice my cursor hasn't moved. You better go and put it over to the other side. So now we're at the second parameter, the input format. Now, if we just quickly switch back to Notepad, you can see that it wants something called .file type. Now, this is the one that probably was the most annoying for you when you first did it, and I'm glad you figured it out because I didn't have to worry, so she made me look smart. Here is the deal with file type. Remember that this function brings back an array of results. Even if you ask for one file, it's still going to treat it as an array. Why? Because it's possible to call this API and say, can you please give me any document with an E in its name and give me the PDF URL? And there would be a row, an entry for each and every matching document. So whether you call one document, whether you call 20 documents, it doesn't matter. It's an array. So the issue with that is, in fact, I can demonstrate it, is this. If we come into here and we went, oh, I just want to do file type, you would instantly get an apply to each put around here, because Flow basically goes, wait a second, this is an array, therefore you're going to iterate through. Yeah. Now, we don't want to do that. We want to keep our flow looking a bit cleaner and nicer and simpler. So what we can do is if we just said, we know there's only ever going to be one result, and there's a function called first. So if we said, just bring me the first result, then we'll be able to basically add that to our expression. So give me the first one and just bring back the file type. So first we go first, and then we type in body, the body of my parse JSON. Parse JSON, that's going to have to be in quotes, so with an underscore JSON. Let's see, put that in quote. Right. So parse JSON, and then we say first we want list data. Let's go to list data, and that needs to be in a quote as well. So this is literally the notation to the workflow definition language notation of walking through JSON data. So after list data, what do we want? Row.
You don't have to put another quote at the end.
Oh, lovely.
Row does it for you.
Cool. And then finally, we go, what's the actual field we need? And that was the one that was file type, right? So let's try, and this needs to be also in a square. So go square, quote, and I'll go .file type. What do you reckon? Was it?
Lowercase f with a uppercase T.
File type.
File yipe.
File Skype.
File light.
File type. So let's test that. Let's close that and see if that works. So if I go OK, we now have our expression in here. So the nice thing is, you see how we're combining, this variable allows us to take dynamic content, static content, and our own custom functions as well, which is really quite handy. So now let's build out the rest of this thing. It won't take us that much longer. A lot of this is rinse and repeat. So the next bit in the parameter is this and CS equals. And so now caller stack luckily is one of those easier ones. In fact, it's the very first JSON. Yay. So we go caller stack, done. Cool. After caller stack, we then have to do doc ID. So finally we go and doc ID, DOCID, equals. Now this isn't actually the document ID, this is the URL. It wants to know the URL of the thing. And guess what? This is another one of those that uses the first function.
Yes.
So the one we need, in fact, I'm just going to paste this in this time because it's easier. We saw what we were doing last time, and then I'll just show. So we go to expression, and don't forget, always check where your cursor is too before you do this. Paste this expression, and you can see that we're going back again. We're saying list data row .sp item URL. And let's go OK.
And then last one.
Cool. And the final one after that is ampersand drive access token.
Find it.
Oh, yeah.
It's right there.
You don't even need to, is that all you do? You need to do nothing about access token, you just literally do the token.
Just click it.
Okay.
And you should be all good.
Like that. Okay. Allegedly, we have done this right. So let's rename this to generate URL. Generate actual URL. All right. Let's do a little test just to see if it works. Again, in fact, I can test it this time by using the previous run that we did earlier, which was successful. So let's do that run. So we've just run the flow. It's gone through again. Let's have a look at this generate actual URL. And if we look down here, it looks kind of legit. We're seeing all of the right things being moved. We can't know for sure until we test, but guess what? You know how we can test? If I just grab all this, let's prove that this works now by pasting that URL with that missing H. With missing H, press enter. Look, we have a PDF.
It's beautiful.
I hope we keep that in this. All right, so that's great. We've actually proven that everything's working. The flow is doing what it's supposed to. So the final step now, we come back to our flow. So let's add the final step. Now the final step is easy. After doing all that, if you got to this point, then the final one's really simple. You just type in PowerApps, because we have to return it to PowerApps. So we go to, there it is it, respond to PowerApps. So we're going to respond to PowerApps. We say, what output are we going to add to PowerApps? And so we're going to add some text. And I'm going to call it PDF URL because I'm really imaginative. And what is the value that we're sending back? Well, it's that variable PDF URL that we made on that previous step. It's worth noting that you can respond with other data. It's not just like a single string. You can
bring a whole bunch back, and it's the same structure as getting something out of a collection, really,
exactly.
with that
it's just
dot
like a
value.
dot property, yeah. So let's save this. And we now have it. So now we're going to, in fact, I'm also going to rename this to get my PDF. Get my PDF. Get my PDF. Now let's go back to PowerApps and finish the job. Now we are back where we were, at where we started, back in PowerApps. And what we need to do now is in fact, I still have the button selected from where we left off.
Solid.
If we go to the action menu and we click flows, any flow that has a PowerApps trigger in this environment that I have permission to will appear. And you can see that I do have a lot, but there's the one I'm interested in, get my PDF. So if I click on this one, it will say it's adding. And then, like magic, if everything's worked properly, we are now up here. And this is why we made the point of renaming our actions at the start, because this actually is a little bit meaningful. This makes sense to someone.
At least I know what I want to put in there now, instead of just initialize variable.
Exactly.
Initialize variable.
So here's the thing. We need to pass it the ID of the current selected row. So remember that this gallery is connected to the data source. It's connected to SharePoint. And so therefore, we already know we can get anything from SharePoint can be passed from this. So under here, what would be the first parameter, Ashley?
Well, you'd have this item.id.
Very well done, this item.id. So that says whichever row you've chosen, that's the ID to send. Then the next one we want is the path. Remember I made the point of path? So if I go this item dot, it's a built-in one, so it's got the squiggle bracket kind of thing going on. That's a PowerApps thing. This item dot path, and if I close that, in theory, that flow will call.
There's also they've updated PowerApps so that you don't have to type in this item if it's in a gallery.
Oh, really? Oh, yes. Nice. Oh, I like using this item though.
It does make me feel safe.
Yeah, we'll just leave that as is. This is a flow day today, so we'll make this is all about flow. But here's what we need to do. We need to collect the output of this into a variable.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to actually go set, because set is how you make a variable. And I'm going to call this my PDF, comma, then it's whatever the output of that one is going to be put into the variable called my PDF. And in fact, then a final step is this. In fact, let me run it just to initialize it once. I don't know if I need to do this, but our flow has literally just gone and done stuff. Has it worked? Let's go and have a look. View, variables, my PDF. We're seeing the record icon of goodness. Oh, yes. And you notice it's called PDF URL. So like Ashley mentioned earlier, if I come to the document property of this one and I type in my PDF dot PDF URL, right? We should be seeing goodness. Oh, like it. Beautiful. And that one is an Excel file. So now let me put this on preview. Let's try barbecue. And let's try the barbecue troubleshooting plan. By the way, none of these documents are really to do with barbecues nor to do with swings. So you're just going to have to, they're just randoms that we grabbed. Look at that. Nice. Look at that. Pretty, pretty, pretty. Okay. So if I now change it from a manual to parts, now we have the Excel. Let's click go. And we've proved that an Excel file will load.
Give it a couple seconds.
And that's a crazy Excel file. That's a decision-making Excel file of mine. But that's not bad. That's a pretty hardcore file.
Considering how much is on that page, it's loaded pretty quickly.
What about we go to swings now? And let's go to the warranty. I'm looking for a PowerPoint. There you go. Safety guide. Go. And up comes, and look at that. And it's not a safety guide, but instead it's the absolutely wonderful SharePoint patterns and practices slide from their slide deck, which if you've never seen PNP, you don't know what you're missing. But that's another story. But basically, what we've proven now is end-to-end. We have got a Power App that at the click of a button, we can find exactly the documents we want based on the equipment type and the document type.
Yep.
From there, it's one click to bring up the document. So in the scenario where you needed to inspect something and decide whether something was a pass or a fail, and you needed to refer to some, acceptable usage guidelines or anything like that, this allows you to do that. So hopefully you enjoyed that and enjoyed the walking of our cat along the way. And let us know any feedback you have if you have any trouble with this. But yeah, it's a really good example of getting into advanced flow with expressions. The flow itself was still it's actually quite a simple flow in the end. It's just got, in 7 easy steps. All right, excellent. Well, we will talk to you another time when we have another great idea to share with the world. And Freddie wants to say bye as well. So from Ashlee and myself and a very tired cat who's just been for a walk, we'll see you next time.
Bye.